One of the main words they use to market this stuff is equity and inclusion. The idea that we need to include everybody in these new systems. But if you don't participate in digital ID, you won't have a legally recognized identity, you won't have rights, you won't be able to access services without it. So it's being framed as promoting inclusion, but the system itself is inherently exclusionary and has been used to track and surveil people, to link people to, essentially all their activities, what they say online in some of the countries that have rolled this out, and has been used to facilitate human rights abuses. There's a coordinated global policy push for digital IDs as the new form of government-issued identification credentials. And they're essentially all based on your biometric data, which can be your fingerprints, your face, the iris of your eyeball. And the idea is essentially to collect all of that data and have it housed or have it tied directly to your digital ID, so your physical ID will be mapped to the digital ID.
In today's video, investigative journalist Whitney Webb once again delves into the hidden dangers of digital IDs and centralized finance. In her latest interview with Big Picture, she discusses how these emerging technologies, while marketed as convenient and secure, pose serious risks to privacy, enable increased surveillance, and consolidate financial power, potentially undermining individual freedom and financial independence. Digital IDs and centralized finance offer convenience but pose significant risks. Digital IDs can lead to privacy concerns, as sensitive personal information becomes vulnerable to data breaches and misuse. Centralized financial systems, controlled by a few entities, may limit user autonomy, expose individuals to surveillance, and increase the risk of fraud. These hidden dangers underscore the need for robust security measures and decentralized alternatives to protect users' privacy and financial freedom. According to Whitney Webb, governments worldwide are pushing for digital IDs based on biometric data like fingerprints and facial recognition. Proponents emphasize equity and inclusion, but she notes that non-participation means no legally recognized identity, rights, or access to services. Webb cites vaccine passports as an example, limiting movement for non-holders. A UN publication, The People's Money, describes a digital banking system linked to the Sustainable Development Goals that could access users' money for infrastructure development. We will now bring you clips from Whitney's interview with Big Picture. This is an important video you won't want to miss. Please watch, share, and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more content like this. Thanks for joining us again, and enjoy the video.
One of the main words they use to market this stuff is equity and inclusion. The idea that we need to include everybody in these new systems. But if you don't participate in digital ID, you won't have a legally recognized identity, you won't have rights, you won't be able to access services without it. So it's being framed as promoting inclusion, but the system itself is inherently exclusionary and has been used to track and surveil people, to link people to, essentially all their activities, what they say online in some of the countries that have rolled this out, and has been used to facilitate human rights abuses. So it's not exactly as inclusive as they like to claim. It's inclusive in the sense that we want everyone equally included in our new system that we're creating, our new control system. Well, there's this one UN document called the People's Money, they call it, and it essentially talks about creating a citizen-centric, SDG-aligned digital financial system, which is obviously the system that we've been talking about. And what they say in there is essentially once your savings and your money is onboarded onto the system, they feel that they reserve the right to access and use your funds to develop and implement the Sustainable Development Goals or build the infrastructure necessary for it. So they essentially think that your money is their money. When COVID was happening, there was this push for vaccine passports, and a lot of the people that were pushing or creating the vaccine passports were part of this either ID 2020 or they were part of related entities pushing for digital ID. And essentially what happened with the vaccine passport was to link your identity to your travel, to the freedom of movement. And if you didn't have one, you were excluded from entering certain places. So that, again, highlights the idea of how these digital IDs are inherently exclusionary, because if you don't have one, then you're excluded from, moving where other people that have those privileges. And if you don't abide by these various stipulations, you're excluded from participating in those things. So just like digital IDs are inherently exclusionary and being sold as a tool for inclusion, CBDCs and also digital IDs are being framed as decentralized when in reality they're very centralized. So in the case of digital IDs, there's this push to create decentralized IDs, they call it, where your credentials are only unencrypted on a need-to-know basis. And that sounds great in practice, but in reality, these rely on what they call trusted third parties to verify those credentials. And those are the same government agencies and big banks and other entities that are those same trusted third parties. So it's really not as decentralized as a lot of their proponents would like to claim. When you move into this digital currency era where the banks are issuing these stable coins, these deposit tokens that are programmable money, it's not just programmable, they're going to be sharing this data in the same database that the CIA and any other intelligence agency can access whenever they want without a warrant. This is like baking in warrantless spying on Americans into the new system to come. So there's no more Congress needing to pass, the laws that facilitate FISA warrants and stuff like that have sort of been the existing infrastructure to institutionalize warrantless spying on Americans. This is a way to literally make it a part of the infrastructure from the get-go.
According to Whitney Webb, politicians who reject central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, frequently reject public-facing CBDCs rather than wholesale ones. Private banks will manage tokenized deposits and stablecoins, which can be programmed and monitored similarly to CBDCs. Whitney Webb wonders whether private bank control protects financial liberty and privacy. She mentions Jamie Dimon's offer to seize property for climate policy, as well as Bank of America's disclosure of private transactions to authorities. Whitney Webb asserts that central bankers such as Mark Carney argue for a new system based on multipolar currencies, CBDCs, and global carbon markets. The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero relies on development banks. She emphasizes the quest for universal digital IDs, which track transactions on a centralized ledger. This, together with global carbon markets and CBDCs, serves as the cornerstone for the new financial system. Let's get back to Whitney's interview as she reveals more disturbing insights into the relationship between digital IDs and central banks.
So when you have people like Trump and Ron DeSantis say no CBDC, they mean no public-facing CBDC. They don't mean no wholesale CBDC. And what this second tier managed by the private banks is likely to be are things like tokenized deposits, stable coins, things of financial products of that nature. And people will be interacting with that and thinking it's a private sector thing, not necessarily something managed by the federal government or managed by the central bank. But if you are concerned about CBDCs because of the programmability and surveillance aspects, tokenized deposits and bank-issued stablecoins can do all of those things too. You can program them with smart contracts. You can use the same controls on them and surveil them. So the idea that this is any better for financial liberty or for financial privacy is completely mistaken. So you have Jamie Dimon, head of JP Morgan, for example, saying we should be able to seize people's private property for climate change policy related purposes. So is having Jamie Dimon surveil and program your currency better than having the Federal Reserve surveil and program your currency? I mean, I think fundamentally at the end of the day, it's really not that different. I mean, the banks are very willing collaborators with the state surveillance apparatus. Bank of America, for example, after January 6, gave all of these private financial transactions of account holders to the Department of Justice and the FBI, investigating people who were merely there based on geolocation data in a way that was called out for being fundamentally unconstitutional. So these banks have no problem giving your data away to the federal government when they ask. So the idea that this is a better model than a CBDC, I think, is honestly, a misconception. prominent central bankers have been going on about the need to create a new financial system and a new financial governance system since at least 2019. So in 2019 at Jackson Hole, Mark Carney, who I believe then was head of the Bank of England, but he's former Goldman Sachs, was very vocal about the need to create this new financial system. And he said this new financial system that needs to be made needs to be based mainly on three things: what he called multipolar currencies, CBDCs, and global carbon markets. That this needed to be where the future financial governance system, the pillars on which it's built, essentially. And a few years later, Mark Carney creates this Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero under the auspices of the UN that is partnered with people like BlackRock's Larry Fink, the billionaire Mike Bloomberg, for example. And they openly promote the idea of seizing the new Bretton Woods moment in order to create a new global financial governance system. The crux of their plan hinges on leveraging the multilateral development banking system. So that's the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. It's the World Bank. It's any of these other MDBs, which include like the Inter-American Development Bank, all these development banks around the world that are part of this existing financial governance system. And those banks have been criticized for a long time for using the debt slavery model, essentially, basically giving loans to countries, saddling them with debt, and then they struggle to repay their debt, in the way they're able to get new disbursements or, pay back their debt is related to them enacting policy objectives, often austerity. One thing people don't realize about the digital ID thing, too, is that there's a push not just to have people have digital ID, but literally everything alive have a digital ID. So Larry Fink talked about this when he recently talked about how he views the tokenization of real world assets moving forward. Everything's going to be on this universal ledger and have its unique identifier. He recently was very overt about how there's going to be a universal ledger where all transactions are tracked, essentially, and that this is key to this new financial system that's being created that involves digital IDs. It also involves global carbon markets, and the CBDC digital currency model. All of that is going to be on this centralized database. That's what Fink is saying.
Whitney Webb claims that digital IDs are not decentralized, as they rely on government agencies and banks for verification. Digital currencies may potentially enable warrantless spying by intelligence services, so incorporating surveillance into the system. She argues that this might lead to institutionalized spying on citizens without legislative oversight or warrants. She emphasizes that this shift towards centralized digital identities could erode personal freedoms and privacy. As governments advocate for these systems, they often tout benefits like efficiency and security, but the underlying risks are substantial. The convenience of having all personal information in one digital ID may come at the expense of individual rights, creating a scenario where citizens are monitored more closely than ever before. Moreover, Webb points out that the collection of biometric data, such as fingerprints and facial recognition, poses an even greater threat. This data is not only sensitive, but also susceptible to misuse by malicious actors. In a world where hackers can compromise vast databases, the potential for identity theft and other crimes escalates dramatically. Ultimately, Webb warns that this trajectory could pave the way for a dystopian future where privacy is merely a relic of the past. The question we must confront is whether we are willing to sacrifice our freedom for the false sense of security that these systems promise. As the landscape of digital identity continues to evolve, it is imperative to advocate for transparency, accountability, and decentralized alternatives that protect our rights rather than undermine them. What are your thoughts on Whitney's interview? Can a centralized digital financial system truly ensure financial liberty and privacy? Please drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.